Hello, this is Alan Wheeler on my YouTube channel where lately I've been talking about tarot and spirituality. And today I'm going to go to the Morgan-Greer Tarot, and I plan for the title to be Morgan-Greer Tarot Helps Christians Love Witches or something. I've got to make the title short enough to fit in, but the topic is how to help Christians be more accepting of alternate paths and alternative practices. My habit lately has been to show something from my altar here until I run out of things or start forgetting. And so I'll show off a small piece of, I believe it's called snowflake obsidian. And I had a professional reading done, just one by Kelly Ann Maddox, and she used the mini Rider-Waite Smith cards, and she brought out some rose quartz and some snowflake obsidian like this. And so soon thereafter I bought both the deck and the snowflake obsidian for my own use. So I keep that here on the altar. So the question is how to help Christians be more accepting of witches, Wicca, pagans, New Age, tarot cards, yoga, meditation, and so on. Alternative paths and alternative practices. And coming from a Christian area here in the Bible Belt, and coming out of the Christian tradition that I didn't enter myself until I was about 30 years old, but that's of interest to me. So let me give some preliminary thoughts, maybe half-baked, as many of my thoughts are, and then turn to the cards and use them as a mirror, maybe to help reflect on this idea. So, being an English instructor, when I think about argumentation or persuading others, I naturally go to Aristotle's three appeals. The appeal to logic, the appeal to emotions, and the appeal to ethos, which is character and credibility. So just working this out from that standpoint of kind of traditional rhetoric, traditional persuasion, I would say, well, use logic and give the history that it was more or less, in history that the kind of the ecclesiastic fantasy was that there was a organized satanic force coming against the formal religion of the church, and that was pretty much disbanded. I saw recently on a Harvard lecture that's running on YouTube lately, and or coming through my stream anyway. And that was kind of given up, even by the Spanish Inquisition, who, we would think would not be the first to give up the witch hunt, but early on did. And so that was passed on into popular culture and became popularized in books and folklore and things. And so Um, the truth is, looking at the history, looking at the facts, again, the logical appeal, is that um, there was no organized satanic force, and that it was more of a eclectic collection of practices. And one historian said, according to the lecture I just watched, that uh, the sum of the parts were less than the whole. And this kind of ragtag collection of practices. So I suppose one approach would be to just to educate that what how the perception is different from the reality. The emotional appeal to just the appeal to the heart um, would be to express love, and although that might not always work with many people, friendship and uh, acceptance is reciprocated and builds bridges. Um, so the appeal to have a heart and uh, have compassion on those who are different than you. And so the emotional appeal might work. The third one, the ethical appeal, or the appeal to ethos, the, the faith, the trust, the character, and credibility, um, is the hardest one for my students to understand sometimes. But a good example is of in our handbook, our writing handbook, a Navajo woman is trying to express to a Christian audience that the land is sacred to them, that uh, the Great Spirit speaks uh, and connects with them through the land. And um, in order to say that in a way that the Christians could understand it in their ethos, she said, "Our land is our Bible." So this, in a way, it translated their faith, their path in a way that it maybe could be related to by the Christians. So maybe that's a third way. Uh, some other preliminary thoughts are that it's probably a good idea to start small and with humor, um, rather than to come in blazing in with guns, firing with the big guns, firing, because it's such a process, and it's taken me quite some time to absorb and understand um, some of the different paths myself. Um, Another preliminary thought is that it might be useful to consider the audience rather than imagining everyone else is Christian or everyone else is against me, um, which I certainly felt when I was, before I investigated, I felt as a Christian, I felt like the minority and the marginalized. And uh, although I find that the others feel the same way, and rightfully so. But to consider the actual audience, probably just a small percentage of people are going to be very fundamentalist. And there's also, even among Christians, there's going to be some very liberal ones. Most people are going to not be um, strong practicers of a faith and are going to be very secular. And if we look at the popular culture now with TV shows, let's see if I can remember the name, Strange Angel, about Crowley and with witchcraft in it, there's certainly a shift in the culture where there's more acceptance. So just thinking about that um, might help build bridges. Um, One thing that I'm not sure how to use it, but one thing to keep in mind is that some people are very invested in their faith. So someone like Derek Prince, who has, I assume, made a living writing books against um, certain New Age practices and occult practices, uh, are very invested and may profit, maybe not maliciously, but actually they're dependent on those ideas for not just who they are and their identity, perhaps, but also make their living in that um, vein. So that's something to keep in mind. Um, One very useful idea for me, and it probably would be helpful for me to be able to express it both um, technically in a long-winded way, as well as in kind of a bumper sticker way, is to leave behind the Old Testament system. Might be the bumper sticker version, um, or to realize that um, Jesus brought an update when he declared all foods clean, and said, you no longer have to not eat pork and follow all the ceremonies of the Jewish law. Um, it's okay to heal on the Sabbath. Um, we should accept the Gentiles and break out of the kind of the tribal shell and things like that. Um, so, in a more theological sense, that would be called progressive revelation. And just as Buddha brought updates to the Hindu system and Hindu ideas, Jesus brought updates to the Old Testament and the Jewish um, canon there, in a sense. So that might be helpful. But with those and probably many other thoughts, I come to the table, I come to the altar, and I pulled one rune and three cards from the Morgan-Greer Tarot, and I've just reflected on them briefly in advance. So let's look at these. The rune that I pulled was Thurisaz, and it looks like a thorn, and the meaning is thorn, and I've seen different descriptions of its meaning, and it can be like the uh, thorny barrier, the hedge of protection. It can be like a hammer, um, or it can represent uh, the thorn on the rose, the um, hardship or the challenge that comes with grasping something beautiful, perhaps. In this case, um, I would read that as there's definitely that thorny hedge that has to be faced if one is going to uh, try to reach probably anyone from a polarized camp or a different way of thinking. And so to be aware of that defensiveness that is going to be there and to tread carefully, perhaps. The first card that I drew was the Three of Wands. And in the Morgan-Greer Tarot, you can see this figure a close-up of this figure looking out into the horizon. And we know from the Rider-Waite-Smith and other decks that sometimes there's some ships that are either launching out or returning from some kind of venture. And to me, this card would say that to build a bridge, to reach out to Christians, is going to take, at least from me, patience and vision, willingness to put in the work and to wait, to understand it is a process, working through those thorns and thistles that we just saw. And I know from when I've made posts on Facebook recently regarding tolerance and acceptance, I've had a little bit of pushback. Many Christians have shown agreement, but there have been some thorns and thistles that I've experienced. But I need to understand it's a process, and I may need to plant the proverbial seed and wait for it to grow, to watch that horizon, and have that vision and have that willingness to invest in something worthwhile, knowing the results will not be immediate. So the Three of Wands. The next card I pulled was Strength. And again, that's a beautiful picture of inner strength as this beautiful figure cuddles a lion. And this is not the Chariot, the previous card. This is number 8 in the Morgan-Greer. The Chariot is number 7. And that's, I picture the Chariot as blazing in, trying to win that argument, get that victory. But this is a quiet power here. And I need to reflect on this more, but allowing the Spirit to do the work and to not to push and not to be so aggressive outwardly in building these bridges and bringing this understanding. So the Strength card. And the last card I drew, the Six of Pentacles, or Six of Coins. And here we have the figure with balances, and there's this giving and receiving. And I think in building relationships among people who are not like-minded, that simple acts of kindness, sharing, giving and receiving help is huge. And so maybe giving a Yuletide card, or helping out when there's a need, is a good way to build bridges. And this is in the earth element, so it's practical, not just in the realm of ideas and giving and receiving ideas, but physical help. And I think the card also sometimes speaks of family and home, and this kind of welcoming into homes, hospitality, may be a good way to build those bridges in practical matters. So obviously it's a thorny situation, but maybe with the vision and patience, knowing it's a process, having that quiet, but being willing, wanting to even build those bridges, may be difficult for some. Having that inner strength and the giving and receiving in the physical, practical realms may be ways to break through the defensiveness. And that's something I would like to see happen in the world. And so I offer this video for myself as food for thought, and anyone else who benefits from it, I will be very happy. So as always, I hope that you have a sense of connection with family and friends in the real world, in online communities, and also a connection and support on your spiritual path, whatever that might be. Thanks for watching, and take care.